morning, and what a interesting background that all of a sudden I'm speaking to you about O.S. Strickland, because I'm not a historian of black history. Let's see what else. I'm not a historian of Minden, but I'm really good with oil field records because of when I got involved understanding the history of waste, and I would do oil field stuff. And I did that as a geologist, in exploration producing. And so I bumped into this story, and I'll say a little more about this, but I bumped into this story about claims about this oil company being the oldest or first black-owned oil company in the United States. And I remember thinking, I wonder about that, and I could look up records. And so I started working on this not that many years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And so I'm pleased to talk about it and to talk about O.S. Strickland, the Universal Oil, Gas, and Mining Company. So what I'm going to do, I want to set the stage. I tried to do a lot of things. I've given the talk several times, but I've really spent a lot of time making it work I hope it worked for you. And that I want to start about the overview of black Americans in the oil industry, because it's a very hard history, and it says a lot then about Strickland and what he accomplished in it. So we're going to set that setting, and then go to early black-owned oil companies. I wonder if these lights, that would help you, I bet. We'll see. But anyway, so then the black-owned oil companies, what I learned about those and had examples, and then I'm going to focus in on Mr. Strickland and the Universal Oil, Gas, and Mining Company, specifically in Shreveport, 1930 to 1942. Is that better? Can you read that better? Is that acceptable? And then, as much as possible, and y'all like, well, you all know these. I kept running across Minden people. Now, it's true that Mr. Strickland was from Minden, but there were other Minden people, and so I tried to bring this out, talk about the areas of activity across the country, and then his later years, and then when he died. And again, so when I was reading, it'd be things like when I was decided I'm going to do the history of oil field waste, which I know sounds like a real sleeper, and unless you're interested in it, it is. But I would go and read trade journals, and I would start back, like the early 1900s, because I was reading about these fields. And so, that's sitting in the library doing this. But what would happen, I would find things about black history, and I thought, no one will ever find this stuff again, so I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it aside. So I just always did that, and I just had that. And then somehow, like I said, several years ago, I bumped into this story about the Universal Oil and Gas Mining Company. And then I probably read, Willie Burton wrote a book about the history of black in Shreveport. And what he did, he sat down with the Shreveport Sun and those old archives, and he just read them from beginning to end, and he wrote that book. And so he writes about O.S. Strickland as presented in the Shreveport Sun, the black newspaper from Shreveport. And so it's those stories, and I thought, I bet you I can expand on this. Because now there's just so much out there, and a lot has been digitized, including newspapers. And so that's what I did. Then I focused, I thought, well, I'm just see records, and we'll talk about that. I tell you the thing that really, of course, I'm just an old stupid white woman. When I read the black newspapers, I went, oh my gosh, what a great thing, and how sad that I had missed it. And there it was. There was the stories then that I wanted about oil fields. And then I knew as much as possible when the papers would say something that I could look up more about the oil fields, and also photographic records. And back here, also when I would go to archives, I found one, and I found some stuff from 1903 about fields in southeast Texas, and about, mobs attacking black people, and I had always kept that. So it was finally, I was able to bring all that back, and so then I wrote this paper in 2023. So, that's what I'm going to do. The first time that you ever see anything written about what was called the black history, there's a publication in 1969, University of Pennsylvania, called The Negro and Petroleum Industry. And what they did, of course, you look at it, and they really only start, and I say that, this particular book starts about 1940, and they really didn't, it talked a lot about refineries, and they do statistics. They really didn't talk that much about oil fields. But the thing about it, and it's just the truth, it was, the oil industry just, it's a really tough record. They're just like Society of the South. It was really bad about racial violence and discrimination. And there's a lot of records that show this. And so this was something, but it really didn't get into that old history. And what I would find, and that would be these, what I'll call oil trade journals, and it's, you know, it's just put out about oil fields, and it's just stories, and they would have some things about oil field racial discrimination and violence. Very little is written or known about the black-owned oil company. It was only the black newspapers that had saved that history, and the best preservation, as I said, is from that. So what I want to do is just, so if you grew up like me, you know, you're just kind of uninformed. You know, what is presented to us in history, you know from photography and such, that really mostly we know about workers, the black workers, it's labor jobs, cooks, ditches, you know some about racial strife, you know, these presented. But and I knew also, though, because I'm so close to the East Texas field and reading records of the East Texas oil field, black owners of mineral rights. And that now brings in, because we need money if we want to drill some wells, and there brings in the finances, right? So black people can separate from having to depend on those other resources. And so we'll talk a little about that. And then the black-owned oil companies, of course, I'm going to get to here because we're interested in that. But you know, what you found was that, sure enough, there were people like, go to the East Texas field, and black people that own oil rights, and if a person knows how to manage land, then they could do that work for them. It was hard, but they could, and it was hard because it wasn't easily allowed to do. But then these special companies, and these are the ones that they drill their leases. And actually, the first one that I found, and I'm pretty sure someone else had found it in an obscure thesis, and I wrote him, and I said, oh my gosh, it was in 1903, and so he found that. And then I found this, and there's probably more, but we'll talk again more about Mr. Strickland's company. So Mr. Strickland's company wasn't the first, but it was pretty significant. So imagery, if you're just flipping oil history books, the imagery that you'll see presented, which was common because this is what was allowed, oilmen, workers, labor, you know, pipeline work. Here, this is 1914. This is the East Texas field, and there is just the mule team, and they're hauling equipment. I mean, it's that kind of work that is common, recorded for history. But so black-owned oil company history, as I said, is very poorly preserved. And here's another thing, and you guys probably know this, the preservation on black-owned newspapers is just horrible. You know, the Shreveport Sun, part of it caught on fire. Also, it just wasn't stored well until they got it to Southern, but Southern's, you know, some of the big ones up in Pittsburgh, Chicago, you know, some have been digitized, but the original records are often gone. So it's hard, you know. And what you'll find, though, is that this is really a black community thing, because the finances and the funding and the support is coming from the people who have some money, and it's coming from the black-owned newspapers. And so the black-owned newspapers not only are going to save this history and record it, they're going to be the promoters, not only in their articles, but the companies are going to run ads in them. And so, you know, it's just another oil history story. And it's just been great. And when you look at, and I'll just mention the companies I looked at and the oil company boards, there were 2 Shreveport companies, but the community leaders, and I'll mention some people here in Minden that were on the board, and probably some of you know those families. And I'll tell you another great thing, because you don't see that in those oil companies that I've seen, men and women on the boards. You know, I mean, wow, in the 30s. That is, I mean, that's not common. So what I did, I call it the geography of black-owned oil company examples that I had. And remind you about oil and gas. This is on a 1940 map. Of course, you know all this, and you can see all this greenish. So 1940, red is gas, greenish is oil. This gives you an idea, really, in 1940. I had to pick a time to plot these oil companies. And so what I'd studied, here was that company called Wilgira. Of course, they're up in here. The World Wonder Oil Company, he was out of Kansas City, Missouri. And then here's going to be the Universal Oil Company, and it's going to be this color. And also, I'll mention Mr. Strickland's early work before he started that company in 1930, where he was up in southern Arkansas and even down to Claiborne Parish in the 20s. So this is kind of that geography, but now I'm going to take that geography, and you understand they're just chasing oil and gas, but I'm going to plot it on a map where you need to know your history about why do I think that's significant about the struggles of black-owned oil companies. This is a map, and I know you know this history, but I've taken this paper to Canada, and they don't know this history as well. But what you see, first off, this is showing you in that gray, this is proportion of slave by counties, right? And what I'm trying to do, so this is like here, 50% Caddo, Bossier Parish. In other words, I'm trying to have people understand black communities, the general distribution of black communities that's inherited from the 1800s. Okay, that's one thing. So you understand that, as far as black support, like East Texas, Caddo. But here's the other one that I really, this is and this is all available and done, but a lynching dot map from 1883 to 1941. The reason I do this is that you have to understand and appreciate the violence that's going on. Look, it's hard enough even in my age, and I'm not that old, but for people to go out into oil fields, if you're not welcome, it's going to be hard, and it's all going to be hard to the fact they're called lynching and being shot at and such. So it's a really, really tough world to be a black person at this time frame, going out and drilling wells, and I'll tell you some stories about that. So that's really the purpose of it, and I'm just going to mention that everything I'm going to say about his work is going to be in some areas. Caddo Bossier, as you well know, and I won't take up too much time, but when I was saying to you how I used to just find stories of, murder and lynchings in oil fields, there was a lot that South Texas and Southwest Louisiana, there's some pretty tough stories down in there. And so oil fields were, and up here in Oklahoma and some in Kansas. But that is the background of why what he does is so significant. Okay, it's not just you and me starting an oil company. So here's just some pictures I won't go through, but the Wilgera Oil and Gas Company, 1903, and this is a Washington D.C. Black-owned paper, the Colored American, and these men who started this company, and unfortunately they found natural gas, and in those days nobody wanted natural gas. Natural gas, just let that stuff blow. We wanted oil. So unfortunately they weren't successful, but in that. But this is the other thing. These are just very successful men. One was a president of a college in West Virginia, and just different businessmen who not only had funds, but could raise monies and could hire the people if they didn't know, if they weren't, geology in 1903 is not very good. But, generally, if there was oil and gas, you'd go drill in the area. That was about what you did in 1903. Okay, but you had to buy the land, you had to buy the leases. So here's another one. This was the World Wonder. And so what you're looking at, of course, this is advertisement. Because this is the thing, not only you may have people on your board that have money, but just like everybody, you have to raise funds. So you see a lot of advertisement in the newspapers. And so here they are, they're going to tell me this is just like all oil people, right? We are going to tell you that we are going to make you rich. And so you're going to cut this thing out right here, and you're going to send me a check, and you're going to buy, some opportunities. But it's very interesting, and of course they will all say, this one also, the World Wonder, he was he was out of Missouri, he was a pretty successful guy. He went on into life insurance after this, but he did pretty well. And but they talk about often being the only or the largest Negro company in the nation, or the first. You hear that for Universal, but everybody says they're the first, and except the ones, I'm not sure the Wilgera said they were the first, but they were certainly the first, I think, of the 20th century. But you see these in the papers as advertisements. Well, so now talking about Mr. Strickland, and this picture here, I'll just go and start with this. In Shreveport down Texas Street, that was the old black business area. And this is the Antioch Baptist Church. That's the oldest black church in Shreveport. And his office, where he was in Shreveport, was right here. And these are just kind of the remnants. And I'll show you another photo. I'll go down Texas Street about half a block, and there is a building standing where that was a very important building for business. And there's another oil company that'll be there. But talk about Mr. Strickland. So he was born in Central Texas. When he was probably about 6 to 8 years old, his family moved up to Langston, Oklahoma. And Oklahoma, I don't know if you've ever heard about black towns, but Oklahoma had about 50 of them. I think there's about 4 or 5 that still survive, but they were really people in their communities. It was designed, they designed it for themselves, and they made sure that, you know, education was good, and they did their best. And so he grew up in a black town, which I think is very significant. He was educated. There's Langston University. He went there. He writes in a talk later he gave, but he talked about being interested in the magic of the oil game. And he went to southern Arkansas in the 1920s, you know. And so there, you know, there's that obsession. And I think that's true. Oil people, because you're just like anything, you can throw a lot of money at it. Some will survive, some will not. But this obsession, and there I caught that. I thought, there it is. He's attracted to the magic of the oil game. And so he went to the 1920s. And he ended up in smack over maybe El Dorado field. There was a oil company he was part of that was written about in 1923, the Brock Oil Company out of El Dorado. And then the Brock Oil Company, so that's the early 20s, and then the Brock Oil Company is listed in a directory of Shreveport in 1923. So I know that's when he comes into Shreveport. And I think that's about the time he moved to Minden. It could have been a little later. I know from a census that he's living in Minden, his family, in 1930 and such. So, but he's here, and he's had some early experiences. He got a couple of guys to buy an oil rig in 1923, and they went out to the edge of the Haynesville field, and they drilled a dry hole. I don't know anything more about that one, but he was on his way. And so he began this company, and you'll see I'll initial it UOGMC in 1930. And so I'm going to take us through some of the things they did, and some of I think the most significant is that he will train. He had an engineering background, and he worked in mining before he got off into oil. So he had a very technical background, and so he figured out what he needed to know, and he trained and developed, and they did their own drilling and production. And don't let me forget to tell, I'm sure I'll remember, but I'll remember when I talk to you about East Texas, about those struggles in the East Texas field. I always say this just as I knew of the work of William Wallace. He was a Centenary Geology professor, but Strickland would write about his white friends. I'm like, okay, I would have been one of his white friends. And but he talked about Will Wallace. In fact, Burton mentioned Will Wallace, and I thought, oh, I know who that was. That was William Wallace, and he was a geology professor. He was also an oil and gas guy at Centenary. And so, you know, because at those times, I know it's just horrible. It wasn't like they had access to the journals, you know, the journals. And so Will Wallace was probably making sure that, you know, he had access to looking up maps and getting stuff that he needed. And then again, he'll pass away in 1942 as a young man. You can't see these, so I'll read some of these to you. But so the board of directors, what you see in red, I've underlined. Of course, we know that Mr. Strickland's from Minden, but let me just say this. So J.L. Johnson, who was a medical doctor, was first vice president from Minden. William Colquitt was second vice president from Minden, and Colquitt owned oil land south of Shreveport in a field called Zwally Field. So he came in on that board of directors because he had some money, and he wanted to probably find some more oil. All right, so he came in, but he lived here. Now, I don't know if he always lived here. And then William Jackson was a field manager, and he was in Minden. And we'll talk a little more about it. There's going to be a breakup. They're going to have a big breakup in 1936, and Jackson and two of these other guys from Shreveport are going to form another oil company. But some of these ones, and you don't recognize, but they were like, this was a successful doctor in Shreveport. Nelson, another doctor, successful man, Dixon, a dentist from Shreveport. So they were all pretty successful. At this moment on the board, we're not seeing the women, but soon after that, we'll start seeing the women come onto this board. So again, I'm just going to concentrate then on what I said about that. Here's Langston, by the way, just that's Oklahoma City, but Langston is probably about right in here. But what I'll talk about, of course, here were those early years. He was right in here, the Brock Oil Company. They came down to Claiborne Parish, but out of Shreveport, we'll mention the East Texas field. They're going to be very successful. They're going to hit some big wells in the East Texas field. Then they're going to come down to Zwally field, where Mr. Colquitt owns some producing oil wells. They're not successful there, but they're going to go to another field right there, and they're going to have a well or two. And then they're going to come down in 36, 37 to South Texas and have some success. And then come on up here to Oklahoma and Oklahoma City. That's real interesting, but that well wasn't successful. And then they're going to go off into what's called the Illinois Oil Basin in both Illinois and Kentucky and have some wells there. And then he's going to come back in here you're talking now like 1940, and it'll be, sadly, he'll die too soon, because by then he was starting to get more financing coming in, and those white guys, they figured out this man was worth working with, and it's very interesting. All of a sudden, it's changing, but he died too soon. So the East Texas fields, these are some of the headlines, and really just a reflection. Then you're reading these newspapers, and so this is talking about some of these wells, and that term, Race Oil Company, right? 40,000 barrel gusher. And so that's the Shreveport Sun. Now this is the Shreveport Times, highly white, conservative, So looky here, Negroes have big producers. Okay. It's just, to us, it's just, to read these headlines, but it is what it is. And I did want to point out, so they talk about it, and it'll be in 1942 where finally they really write a decent article about him. That's what I want to, they really kind of acknowledge how well he had done. I don't mention that to you, but at the time, but here's the story I really wanted to point out. So in East Texas field, they're talking about they've drilled some producing wells. They were not allowed to have black people working in the field, all right? It was not going to happen. And someone said to me, I said, oh no, you don't understand. They'd have killed him, okay? That's just the way it is. It was not allowed. That was true in Zwally. They had to hire white crew, so he wasn't allowed. And they just said that only white laboring drillers, because it wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's what did happen in East Texas. And he told a story, and with great pleasure. It was finally in 1940 where he could hire his own workers, his own black workers, to work on his wells in the East Texas field. That's like 8 years of that. But he did it. And he got rid of all the white guys, and he hired the people he wanted to finally. So here's the early advertisements. And so two things are happening. When you read the articles in the Shreveport Sun, it's very boisterous. It's not all true, and that's true of all the oil people. If the newspaper said to an oil man or oil woman, said, tell me an honest story about your successes, oh my gosh, well, they'd be telling you they were going to make you rich and all this. So, but that's what the paper writes. They kind of write what these guys are telling them, so they really are building them up. And then they're running these early advertisements, and this is the advertisement they're running. So they're hitting, so they've got that money, coming from the East Texas field, and this is down around south of Shreveport in the Zwally field. You can't really see it. This is not a picture of the Zwally field. That's the other thing. You find some picture, Now, it could have been, it wasn't any of his wells, but in East Texas, those certainly were some gushers like that. But so you have a big picture of this Zwally oil field, and they're telling you, if you buy this much and we find this much, this is what you'll get, which is really a good way to sell it. And so this is talking about, this is also in the Shreveport Sun. They're just explaining to you the greatest mineral organizations produced by Negroes in America, organize, produce, what we're doing, profitable investments. And so that's what's happening. And to remind you, I mean, in our area, because of land ownership, there are people with money, black people, that are going to invest in him. And when you would look at the list, both black and white, that are investing in him. And so that's why you're running these ads and word of mouth. I probably hate to block y'all. I should stand and block them, you know. But so this is fun. We start talking about, so I just wanted to say a little about the Minden people. Of course, O.S. Strickland, Secretary and General Manager. So Johnson, the first Vice President. Colquitt, second Vice President, landowner. William Jackson. Added, so in 1936, they have a big turnover, big turmoil, as I mentioned to you. Some guys go create another company, and they throw them out. You know, that's what he says, they throw them out. And so they changed the board, and so the listing I find by 1937 is Joseph Jones. Well, you know, what an accomplished guy. So he becomes their president, and I remembered, you know, I don't know, because I was trying to learn more about Joseph Jones, so I was reading through the Webster High School history, and when I saw Lady Moore, I thought, I know I saw that name on the director, and sure enough, so she was a board member. So that was neat. So she was one of the 4 women that were on the board of directors for this, and so of course just finding pictures. It's really interesting. So Johnson, and of course Joseph Jones and maybe more, but these 3 were written up in the history of Webster High School. You know, they just it just talks about the community, the people that around Strickland, and I say that it doesn't have anything to do with color, but your money just attracts people, and sometimes, you know, you just have these groups that, you know, you wouldn't let your dog go walk around the block with them, you know, and but these were some really accomplished people. And so their failures, well, ultimately they stopped because Mr. Strickland will die. But they had rough times in the late 30s, but they certainly were an educated group. And I just say that about Mr. Jones because you know him, and of course the elementary school is named after him. But when I'd be reading, so I watched all the names, and then when I'd see things about Mr. Jones, of course, he was just very accomplished, both obviously for the state and nationally recognized in black schools education. He was, I'm sure he would laugh at the word, but he was named an all-magnate. Magnate. I thought, you know, that probably, I thought that probably means you think he's got billions of dollars. But this was, he won an honor. The Chicago paper had listed for that year, 1938, 18 men who they held as examples to the young people of vocational things. And I'm sure rather than pick that he was this outstanding educator, they chose to show he was president of an oil company, which is also great. But, so I just remind you about J.L. Jones and that name. South Texas was also successful. 1936, they're moving in 1937, so that's down in here. This is national. I just try to point this out. So this is the Oklahoma City newspaper. This is the Pittsburgh papers. Of course, these are black-owned newspapers that are writing all about this. And so the Pittsburgh paper really picks up a lot and writes a lot about them over the years. It's a new Texas oil well. You can't really see it, but this is the board. And sure enough, you count about 4 women up in there. And I wanted to point this out. The oil well drillers fired upon and they hold ground. Now this was where they did have a mob try to get onto that lease. And there was and I found that article. There was an article written by a local guy in the white Austin newspaper, and what did he say? He said it was it was a secret Negro order drilling a well. I'm like, what in the world is a secret Negro order? It was a stupid thing to write, but it's something that would provoke, obviously, violence. It was just the way it was written. But so they were fired upon, but they held the ground. So some great photography, but you know, all I'm dealing with is the microfilm, and this is so anyway, the Pittsburgh Courier was a fine paper, and sure enough, the original photography was supposedly thrown away, and then someone saved part of it. In my understanding, they're still trying to save and categorize that. But there it is about the loss of this sort of work. So these are all off microfilm. But here's just pictured down in southeast Texas, and here, and I showed that at the beginning. And here is that black drilling crew, right? There's their rig, and there's, you know, Humble Oil bought their oil, and it was just a fine, you know, good operation. And so they had the East Texas wells, and they had these wells, and so they expanded, they, you know, moving on, and then they went on up to Oklahoma City and opened up an office there. 1938, of course, now again, you want to advertise, so we put this in the Black Dispatch, the Oklahoma City paper, and you just saw those pictures, you know, those are from Texas, and so you're doing that. And so what would happen, and it was very well described, and I learned a lot about him and his company. This gentleman was his office manager, Mr. Twine. I think it was the Reverend Twine, right? I think it was the Reverend Twine. And but he ran the office, and so they would go, and there were two, Bewley, Oklahoma, and Langston, Oklahoma, were black towns, and they went to both of them. They would give presentations, and so the newspapers would describe their presentations, and they talked about the company. In fact, that's where Mr. Strickland talked about Arkansas and starting off there. And so they did drill in Langston on some oil property, but it wasn't successful, and they did not drill. They spent a lot of money opening the office, but they drilled one well and it was dry, and then they moved on, so they didn't. But of course, Oklahoma City had a lot of oil around it, and I think there were some other oil men, black oil men, actually in Oklahoma City that I learned about. And so it may have been that there was just a lot of competition for money and everything. So so they moved on, and look how far. Now we're up in what's called the Illinois Basin. This is in Illinois, and here just on the edge of Kentucky. And so he's getting further and further away. And you know, this just costs money. This is money. You're having to take everything. And I point that out because about this time, there's going to be some sort of like revolt on that board, and I'm sure it's because they're thinking we are traveling all over the country and spending money, and we got oil close by. But so we're going to look at some pictures from up in here, and you can barely see this one. The Centenary oil field. This is 1938, and again, it's in the Shreveport Sun, and luckily, so Willie Burton reads those newspapers in the early 80s. And I saw them, she showed them to me. She said, look, they're just crumbling, all right? Luckily, in the early 80s, they allowed him to take a picture of the newspaper. And so those are the pictures that he put in his book, and they're in the archive. So I digitized what he had taken, but since he took them, well, those newspapers have fallen apart. So that's not very much, but what we have is we have a man named Faulkner, and he was well known in Oklahoma City, and he teamed up, he was a crook though, and he teamed up with Strickland, who's going to figure out he's a crook, and after they drill some wells, he's going to go his way. But, so that's Mr. Strickland, and they do have 2 successful wells, and, but wisely, Mr. Strickland did move on. And Faulkner would be in a bad deal a few years later, and his associate shot him dead. I mean, it's a bad story, you know. And so, but that's what old people do. They just shoot each other. And so then he went on. He had a really great reception in Kentucky. I think both the State Geological Survey, you know, they allowed him to come in and shoot the records, and he had just some great. He wrote very kindly about Kentucky. And they had some troubles and tribulations, though. So they were drilling Kentucky. If you look at a map now, it was in a gaseous natural gas area, and they hit a pocket of gas, and the rig caught on fire, and the whole thing burned down. And so then they went and they bought a new rig. And so this photograph is in front of the new rig that's going to be drilling in Kentucky. And I want to mention, so this will be Mr. Strickland. I know you see all his equipment, and you see all these people, black and white. And this tall man, Israel, IS, it'll come to me. He is a very successful man out of East Texas. He is an attorney. Oh, I'm ashamed. I'm going to look that name up. I'm ashamed of myself. You know, my mind is just flowing. But I want to mention him just because I just tell you these. So he becomes president. So at some point, back to J.L. Jones, I think J.L. Jones said, I got to get back to teaching, you know, and he became the second vice president. I.S. White, my mind, Israel White, but I want to just say something about Israel White. Israel White was out of East Texas. His family had land that did find oil, but even before that, he went on to law school. He got his law degree at Howard University, came on back to Longview. He had started he started a hospital for black people, you know, in Longview, Texas. He got that going. He had his own funeral home. Because he was an attorney, he was in the group that did a lawsuit that integrated Kilgore Junior College. Now, I'm telling you, that would have been a big deal. And then he helped fund litigation that integrated the University of Texas. So, I mean, he was worth some history. Well, so they're all up there and they're blowing up oil rigs and that's costing money. And so there's trouble back in Shreveport. And so what happened is some of the men on the board, they broke away and then they threw them off. So they started a new company, and I just say this, and they're going to only make it a few years because it's a tough business, but just a half of a block down on Texas Street, this building still stands, the Calathian Temple, which is a very famous building historically, and a lot of black-owned businesses and a nightclub at the top. And it looks better than this picture now because the people bought it and they have saved it and preserved it, and it'll make it. I'll show you this one. This is a warning about W.M. Jackson of Minden. So W.M. Jackson of Minden, he was one of the ones that went off to the Tiger Oil Company. So I got kind of tickled by it, but he warns you about W.M. Jackson. It said he is shady and that financial shady deals coming out of him from South Texas, and we have nothing to do with it. And so you put a lot of your dirty laundry in the newspaper. So the reason I mention him, not only that it's another company, but it's one of the best photographs of a black-owned oil company, and it was found by my friend who lives in Belleville, Texas. I mean, he said, let me look, and he just collects a lot, and he found this, and so I was really very grateful. But you know, sure enough, and this is the board, look at the women, There's about 4 or 5 women. Just run the women had some money, and they're, you know, and they're smart. But I would say one more, and I try not to. Okay, we're good, fine. Mr. Strickland's often known for what was called inventing the electronometer. Well, now we just call them electrometers. And what I did is I read about him, I read the patents. You know, if you know about oil and gas, we can do a lot to measure electrical currents under the earth because of oil and gas and water. And it changes the electrical currents. And they were sort of figuring it out at that time. And there were a lot of patents on what's called electronometers. And so what, he didn't exactly invent that, but what he did first off, the patent, I think he died before the patent was finished. But this is a mural under the Texas Street Bridge for it. But what I could read from the descriptions, unfortunately only in the newspapers, I think is everybody would patent the way they would lay out these wires to take these currents in, right? This type of work, you know, it had a little merit, but it just wasn't that successful. And in fact, all of it just went away. There were a lot of patents by big oil companies, but it all went away because other things came along that were just a lot better. But he's known for that, and if you're ever under the Texas Street Bridge at Shreveport, there's a mural, no sign. I'm like, these people have no idea why this picture's there, but that is him. And so he, 42, so he just starts doing better. They kind of come out of a slump, and he starts to get some investments from a lot of different people, and they're working in East Texas. And that was when, and I didn't post it, but that was when he got a short, it was a favorable article out of that conservative Shreveport Times, but he, you know, high blood pressure and his kidneys and stress, and he died at 42. And so here again, the Oklahoma City article had that, and then of course the Shreveport Sun. So And y'all know this better than me, but Mr. Sweatford had given me just photos of that. And of course, he's buried in the Shepherd Street Cemetery. If you go look at it, there's like a little oil well at the top, and it's a gusher, right? You don't know that with the little lines. I thought, well, that's a little oil well gusher that he had at the top of his tombstone. So, you know, I think the most important message is I'm so happy to be here at Minden and tell you about someone from Minden, but it's quite a national story. And it's such a great oral history story because it's just some history that's been lost. And in oral history, it's done very well. There's people certainly more qualified to be. So I was really glad you just recorded for people. I'm like, it was a great story, you know, about all the stories we're missing about the oral history, but about the black-owned newspapers, the black communities, the leaseholders financing it, men and women on the boards. And the company promoters is from those newspapers. The first all-black oil field crews, I'm certain of that for Strickland. And but it was, even without what they went through, the racial discrimination, violence, and just the fact it's very hard. I mean, it's very hard to raise that money in EMP. It was almost impossible to be successful. And I write that because it just makes you realize, oh my gosh, what accomplishments he did, given that setting. It was a very worthwhile story, and I'm really glad to have given it to you. And I hope I've said something you didn't already know, but it's been a real joy to work on it. Thank you.
Dr. Did Mr. Strickland have heirs?
Well, he did have these children, and I tried to follow the children, but then, and I even wrote, I got on Ancestry, I started searching, but I couldn't have any luck in finding, and probably some of the others. He did. He had some sons.
Yeah, I'm laughing at the friend around a little here. Mr. Strickland had, I didn't know, but they had 6 children.
Yeah.
And when you go to the family gravesite, there are several children there. Now, he did have some of note. Mr. Goodings, you all know Mr. Goodings, who is from there. He was friends with one of Mr. Strickland's children. He changed his name to a Muslim name. I think he had 2, maybe 3 children that changed their names to Muslim names, so it's kind of hard to kind of track them after that. Well, this one fellow played trumpet, and he stayed with Mr. Goodings a few times back in the 50s and early 60s. I think he ended up back here in town because about 1980 or something like that, he lived with Mrs. Strickland down there as a Muslim, and he was always trying to convert us to becoming Muslim. He had one son that ended up in Bastrop, and he was the band director down there.
Oh,
and,
I read about him.
And he was, his nickname was Puff Dish, because evidently all of his children were wonderful musicians. And some of his band students, or one of his band students, wrote a book about him, and it's out of print. And as soon as I can get it, I will. I've been trying to get it for about 10 years. But he just said that he was a wonderful person, a wonderful disciplinarian, and they really thought a lot of him down there. The other one the last one that I heard about was one of his sons who ended up in Mound Bayou. So I did what you would do is I tried to find a telephone number. I did find some telephone numbers, and they were all disconnected. And so I found, just looking around, I couldn't really find anything on it, but because, I couldn't find anything more on his name other than, he had bought some property there. So I don't know what happened to him, I'm just assuming that, he may no longer be with us, but yes, he did have children. Now, Dr. R.T. Nelson was, he was the last officer of the company. And as late as '85, the company was still active and it was still paying dividends. So I did find Dr. R.T. Nelson's grandson. He's about 80 years old. And he promised me that when he came back to Shreveport, he was going to sit down and talk to me a little bit about what was going on. And I'm trying to see what he knows about the whole concern.
I guess it's those East Texas wells. In 41, 42, they were still producing the East Texas wells, and they were producing. He was producing anywhere from 380 to 400 barrels a day. It wasn't a lot, but it paid bills, and they were. He really was. It was. But it just didn't happen. But they were coming back because all of a sudden they just started having a lot more support.
H.L. Hunt was a big deal.
H.L. Hunt was a big deal.
And the funny part was that his wife didn't know he had another family in the different state.
Yeah, I know about that. We know about that. Yeah.
But them rigs were something to put up. I worked for him on shore.
Oh man.
And that's a whole lot better.
There's a lot of books about Hunt. That's true. Yes.
I was just going to add to what Ronald said. They were members of St. West. When I was a little girl, I do remember the last son, his name was Gerald Strickland. He won the scholarship from our church. At one time, our church would give those students who were very committed and had, served their whole time doing their, I guess, membership at St. West. Well, he received that. He was an outstanding young man. He finished from Webster High School. I think he was in the class of 56.
Wow.
Okay, and his mother was a musician. She was a member, very dedicated to St. West. And Randall is over there. He bought their house, the house that you just showed up there. It's in our community, and he can tell you more about that.
Well, Ronald and I discussed this quite a bit. He's an accomplished historian, but Gerald passed away about 3 years ago over in Mount Bayou. He's been the band director today of John F. Kennedy High School in Mount Bayou for 29 years. And I never knew what happened to Odessa Jr., but Calvin was valedictorian at Webster High in 1941. He was probably the most accomplished of the children. And Gerald gave me a lot of information about Calvin. I'm going to leave some information.
Yeah, the furthest I got with the children and all the names listed was I'd go get that census data. So I had the census data 30 and 40, and I remember the children.
I'll leave some information about the kids.
And I found somebody through Ancestry. He was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I said, well, let me just send you because according to that, I kind of got not sure where you fall in that, but I sent him a copy of the paper. I thought,
Calvin wound up, he went to military service. He spent a lot of years in Harlem, New York. He played trumpet with Buddy Miles.
Huh.
And he also was in Duke Ellington, Mercer Ellington, according to his brothers from Mississippi. He was the youngest first-year trumpet player in the United States.
Wow.
And in the major orchestra. And then spent some time in California. He was the arranger for the Lincoln Theater in California. So he was very accomplished. And he toured America, also developed a type of playing music without the bass of treble clefs. So he accomplished a lot of stuff. But I'll leave some of that with you.
It's really like y'all have nothing to do. It'd really be great to get a historical marker in Minden about this. I've said that to people, and of course, I thought I got a trapped audience. I just, it's a very worthwhile state historical marker, and we've got you've got documentation, I've got documentation, and I'm sure it's just a matter, like the museum has nothing to do, But
It's like the biggest factor in it is
money.
the money.
Well, but I think, I'm sure, I know that, and I don't know, but I thought, I know some like historical societies, and you just never know till you.
Right.
But I'd be curious how much money one would have to raise.
I think the current price, and it always depends on how many words and da-da-da, but I think the current price is about $5,000.
Well,
No, this one up in Waco, Texas, at some point teaching school.
his son?
No, the man.
Well, let's Waco. Well, no, now I never found that. I don't, you may have found something. I thought I knew wherever he went. I thought I tracked him better than his wife.
Supposedly he thought that ATM had something in Waco.
Huh.
That was predominantly.
Well, it could have, the only time that when he finished Langston University, he was a young man. He could have, and then he met his wife in Arkansas. Then he was still in Oklahoma and driving back and forth at some point.
I'm trying to figure out where he met.
Yeah, I don't know when that, but because the records are they're tough.
But there are a lot more Stricklands. Gerald had about 9 or 10 kids.
Are they in the Minden area?
They live in Bayou, Mississippi,
In Mississippi.
and they probably have a Muslim name.
Oh, I'm sure, and I'm sure that was one group, because how ancestry, but sure enough, they came back to O.S. Strickland, and I just thought, I do not know where they're all going here. But
Kelvin died in Minden. Charlie Ross died in Belstrop. Willie J was in Florida. And Gerald died in Mount Valley. And I don't know what happened to him.
well, I think you ought to work on that marker. I'd help you raise money, and I'm serious about that. I am. I just think all history-wise, it's a really great story, and I think you would try to put the marker in Minden. I think you could put it. You put it in Shreveport. It's on Texas Street, but it's so run down in there, and I just don't think anybody would see it. But Minden, because this is where they were, is where he was. Anyway, like you've nothing to do, right? Nothing to do. But well,
I'm curious about something. Did you ever invest in or take part in any oil and gas operations? Ever get out in the field?
Well, see, I started with Mobil, and I worked with Mobil Oil and go, drill wells with them, and then I went back to school for my PhD, and then I went back to Mobil, and then I went from Dallas and I went to New Orleans, and there I worked E&P offshore, and after that, then I went to Denver because I became interested in improved recovery. So I used to study the rocks in the old oil fields of California because they would do like really unique things like steam. It's all heavy oil. Like actually, y'all have up here around, but up in here you do. And anyway, so I got involved in what's called improved recovery. And so real intense, just wells everywhere, but a lot of logs. So I became like a log specialist and a rock specialist. That's my PhD is rocks and oil rocks. So that's what I do. As far as personal investment, I was too smart for that. I saved my money. I work for oil companies, and I just said, me personally going out and drilling my own well, no. My thing, I was smart, but I really, and that's why I became interested in oil history, because I used to work those last years before I went to Centenary. I worked a lot of these old oil fields of California, and then Kansas, and some in Louisiana. So, and my PhD was on oil fields over in coastal Alabama. That's pretty dull, but
Most people don't know why, are not aware of why the gas smells the way it does whenever you smell it.
It's, well, it's, now, you mean the natural or what humans put into natural gas?
Well, humans is.
Well, it's because the East Texas field, because you had this horrible accident in the East Texas
Yeah,
field.
it's good.
That blew up the school,
Yeah.
New London. That's a heck of a story, a sad story, I mean, it blew up the whole school, of like 100 children. It was just yes, sir.
I got a question of my great grandfather lived in Haynesville. And,
Haynesville.
in the 30s, 20s. His name was Silas Taylor Sr. And they had about 9 or 10 production. How would I go about researching, find, like the history of it?
Well, like, so you got these oil wells. Say you can, you can. First off, if you knew the name of the wells, that probably you don't.
It'd be the Taylor woman.
Oh, well, then you're off to a good start because you have the Haynesville field and you have the Taylor wells. You probably have an idea. You know how many, you're looking in the 1930s. Yeah, it's hard. Only but years. But the state of Louisiana is one of the best for having digitized all the oil field records. And you can go, I'd have to show you, but you gotta go, you go to the oil field and you put a little box, you see all these wells, and you can filter the wells and you can find it. But it takes some work, but it's very fine. It's very, you just have to look. I tell you an easier way though, now that I think about it, so you say it's in the 1930s. I would, if I were looking for old wells, the first thing I would do is get on Google. There are some old articles written about the Haynesville field. And the lucky thing about that, when you find an old article, there's not so many wells, and often the old articles will list the wells. And I'm aware of, I'll send that to Ronald. I'll think about that for you, Taylor and Haynesville. Yeah, but and you can go to the website. It's called Sunrise, Sonris, S-O-N-R-I-S. But it's a very difficult thing, but doable. It just takes a lot of time. But if you found an old article about the Haynesville, it would cut out so much of the new drill. There's so much that's been done. You have to, but you probably can do it too.
They had a picture of my grandmother, my great grandmother, in the Ford Museum at home about 4 years ago. And I was over there last year. I asked her if she was going to push it. She was standing out in front. I had a picture of her. And I asked her, I want to meet with the board. The picture's not there yet. It was a big, huge picture. And
What a great photo.
I just want to do some research on
Yeah, that's a great story. Yeah, I'd go find that one. That'd be a good story. Yeah, he'll help. He knows what he's doing. He knows.
Well, who's the black oil man in Clayton Parish that was so successful?
You tell me. Of course, he had drilled, but he wasn't successful. But tell me.
I think he was one of the early black millionaires. We started a black school in Clayton Parish.
that name home. I ain't.
I was thinking it was closer to home.
What years you
I'm
think?
thinking in the 30s and the 40s.
I tell you, I never saw.
You know how Acadia Publishing puts out those.
Right. Yep.
I think they've got him in there.
I read that Shreveport Sun all the way through 1942, but I could have missed it.
I think somebody was telling me that his home site still exists.
Yes, it's out there off of,
You know who I'm talking about?
yeah, I can't call his name. It's still on about 2000 acres. His family does.
Well, man, y'all got some great stories to work on, Well,
Anything in Claiborne, I know Wesley Harris at the library in Homer, he would be glad to help with anything in Claiborne area.
Yeah, all right.
She'll come back. I got 80 acres. I'd like to come.
all
I'd just like
right.
to thank Dr. Barrett for being here and thank all of y'all for coming. Is there anything else anybody wants to add or whatever?
I would like to, thank you so very much. I had always heard this story from about 5th grade from Mr. Johnson over at J.L. Jones. And, you know, you just hear little stories, and then, you know, when you hear about them and talk about them, well, that was an old wives' tale. That really didn't happen. And when I had a little time, I started trying to do a little research on it, Mr. Strickland, and I found out that he was a larger character than I thought.
Yeah.
But still, you know, as a layman who's not in the industry, when I, you know, do research, it's just, you know, topographical, something that you just do from the newspapers and everything. So it was very encouraging and refreshing for you as someone that was tied to the industry to do the research and come up with a paper that said, hey, this man had standing, this man really did some very important things, and I think I really appreciate you for that, and I'll always be thankful.
You know, if any of you, if any of you would like a copy of that paper, I have a digital copy, and I know it's kind of dull. Let me go back to the beginning. I have my email address at school. If you were to write me, if you want a copy of that paper, it's a it's a 2023 paper, and I just wrote about, the name of it was Black Americans' Oil Industry Experiences and Black-Owned Oil Companies of 1903 through 1942, and I'd be glad to send a copy to you. You know,
So that's where the pictures come from on the internet?
Well, you know, no, some do, but some is archival, like the Shreveport Sun, you know, you just go through. Others, paid subscription services, because I did that for other reasons. So I had paid subscription services to newspapers, and some of the black-owned newspapers are on there. But as I wrote in here, I said, there's a lot more because there's other paid subscription services that own other black-owned newspapers. And just like the Shreveport Sun, there are a lot of these papers that aren't digitized and online. With the Shreveport Sun, it's been microfilmed, but it's not online. So if you want to read it, you can go either to LSU Shreveport or go to Southern. And so there's so much.
I did a search and a lot of the same pictures that you have came up.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably true. No, you know, this is like, that's Oklahoma City. If you were doing online, paid digital, this one's from the Oklahoma City papers, and it would have come up, you know. And then when I published a paper, it was only those, I worked and tried so hard to get permission from, that's how I knew so much about Pittsburgh's collection. And he was like, well, we don't even know. It's so old, no, they don't even know how to give you permission, so I couldn't really publish those in the paper. But, you know, I put it here. If y'all arrest me, I'll be okay.
Two more things. You said the guy's name at home was Chapman.
Chapman.
Yes.
See, I think there's a lot of stories like this that I'm no expert in this. I mean, I looked at the records on this man, but I mean, it's just people that own land and they find oil and they invest in it. And they may do other things. Now, whether they go out and drill, I didn't come across many like that where you take your money and go. That's a whole nother world.
And going through Strickland's house and looking at your picture, I did find a box with the tripods for the invention he had, but I didn't know what the invention looked like, so I didn't know what to look for.
That's that picture. Of course, that's from the Shreveport Sun, that electronometer.
So maybe I'll look for the electronometer, but somebody might have picked it up.
You know, he wrote that he had put in a patent, but I'd searched the patent office. There was no patent granted, and there was nothing. Sometimes I think you have to, some of the records when you put in an application have been uploaded, but no application had been uploaded. You'd have to, and you just have to go, to get to that level of searching, you just have to get on a plane and go up there. And, I thought, I'm not getting on. That's true of the man that worked out of Kansas City, Missouri. There is a huge black archives in Kansas City, Missouri. And I bet if I wanted to learn a lot about that gentleman that started the World Wonder Oil Company, I'd go to Kansas City, Missouri and just read the archives. You just have to do that kind of level, Well, thank you all for coming,